Welcome to the Theories of Hope podcast, your thoughtful and considered podcast designed to inspire hope in challenging circumstances. I'm your host, Beck Howlett, and as always, we welcome listeners from around the globe and remind you that this podcast is designed for local audiences. I'd like to take a moment, though, to recognise the traditional custodians of the land that this podcast is recorded on, the Gunai people, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, future and emerging, and recognise that their sovereignty was never ceded. I also warn that some content in this podcast may be emotionally challenging for some listeners to hear, and encourage everyone to take the time to remind yourself of your self-care plan and get comfortable before listening. And if you are experiencing distress right now, we encourage you to reach out to your local support services for personal advice and guidance. And links can be found in our bio. Now, on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to Theories of Hope, your podcast designed to inspire hope and resilience. I have with me today three lovely ladies from Quantum in Morwell, Victoria. They are members of the Family Violence Specialist team. They are Carolyn, Joanne and Jill. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about Quantum services and the kind of support that Quantum offers?
Yeah, so Quantum is a not-for-profit organisation. We have offices based in Morwell, Bairnsdale, Sale and Warragul, and we provide a range of services that help people that have problems with housing. We're predominantly a large family violence provider within the Gippsland region, and we're also involved in the Orange Door, which is the first contact point for family violence. We have partnerships with a range of other services within Gippsland area.
Yeah. Generally speaking, you're one of the first referral points for most people if they're experiencing family violence.
So generally they'll go to the Orange Door and they'll be referred through then to our programs for a range of case management supports or crisis accommodation.
What's the difference between domestic violence and family violence, and what do they both look like?
I think there was the old term was domestic violence, and then that only captured between intimate partners, whereas family violence then it captures what we call the whole of the family. So if we're looking at Indigenous communities, that also captures community violence within the Indigenous regions. So it now acknowledges that violence can happen within other family members towards other family members. So adolescent violence towards a parent per se, a father towards a child. It captures all those range of different violence. I think it's offered a different perspective around funding towards different supports, so that we now have specific funding that looks at those areas. So there's now specific funding for programs about dealing with adolescents who use violence, because it's different contexts when you've got a child using violence than when you have an adult using violence. So there's a different service, a different therapeutic response that we provide.
How then do you manage it if it's, because obviously disability comes into that, especially when you're talking about a child, and I know that's certainly the case sometimes where someone's got a significant intellectual disability or something else is going on.
As in with children using violence. So
using violence.
I think you have to put the lens on that it is a child if they're under that 18. So it's a child using violence in the home, and we don't like to say that that child's a perpetrator, because often they're not. It's associated with, as you said, trauma. It might be their disability. They might have behavioural issues. So we really have to put the lens on and have a look at, where's that behaviour coming from. And it is a child, so it's a child using behaviour in the home. And I think now that we have specific funding for children, youth using violence in the home, and it's often perpetrated against their mother, a family member, sibling. So you can get that lens and get the support in to, do assessments and specifically look, is that part of their past trauma? Is it part of they've been part of family violence, and it's through their disability that they're carrying out things that they've seen? So specifically, it's not family violence, it's a child using violence in the home. And now, because we have got supports in the Gippsland area that do support children specifically using violence in the home, so we have practitioners and they are case managers for those children, and in part we have another case manager supporting the mother, the carer, the siblings in that home. So we've now got specific programs for children in the Gippsland area that need support. Their parents, the carers, they need support, because often parents don't want to say my child's using violence against me, and they don't like to talk about it. They don't want other people to know, because it's very shameful, because I failed as a parent. And when you have been in a family violence situation yourself as a parent or carer, and your children are now starting to use violence in the home, often parents feel a great sense of they failed. So I think they find it difficult to accept help. But now that we've got specific programs, it's easier, and it's a holistic approach, I think, that everybody in that home has got supports that they can put in place to look at reducing that behaviour.
So I'll be right then in saying that you take a very restorative and capacity building approach to it, and that you're looking at the whole family unit and the dynamic and how a behaviour from any one person impacts upon everybody else. And when you're helping to support and looking at it, I guess, through a recovery lens, so it's looking at it through that lens and not necessarily punitive in the way that people might traditionally and historically think of family violence support services, the way it perhaps was, say, in the 80s or 70s.
Yeah. I think we've left punitive a long time ago, and now really we look at the victim survivor as the expert in their own life, because that's what they are. They're the experts. They do know best. And as practitioners, we do sit down and we listen to where they want to go. We do the intake now with the MARAM. So we go through the MARAM document, which is an assessment, and we have various parts in that for everybody in the situation, from your victim survivor, children. So we go through the different parts and we look at, what people need. Have you got a disability? Have you got an elder in the house? So it's a very big document, and it goes through, that document with victim survivor, and they are the expert, and we offer supports, resources, goal setting, because we often do the care planning, and it's up to them, what they need to do to support themselves going forward, and we do listen to where they want to go.
What are the experiences that are unique then to people who living with a disability, mental illness, the aged, family carers, and members of other, nationalities that English is not their first language?
I will speak about people living with a disability. So when we think of disability, that is a vast range with a disability. It's a very diverse statement, disability, because it could be anything to physical, cognitive. We get a lot of people that present with a disability that have an overlay of mental health. They might have an overlay of they're from a different country and they have a disability. I think what is unique to people with a disability, 21% of adults with disability in 2016 had experienced physical and sexual violence from a current or previous partner since the age of 15. So we're looking at bigger statistics. 1 in 4 women have experienced violence by an intimate partner that have a disability. There are a lot of unique barriers for people with disability, because if you think, what is their disability? I think one of the biggest ones is the barrier to access services, and that might be a physical barrier, as in Gippsland, not everyone's got a modern office with a wonderful door that's automatic, with an elevator, with disability toilets. So that is a barrier in itself. And I think a lot of people with disabilities still rely on their family, with their carers, NDIS workers to support them to access. And as I recently learned with people that have got deafness, for them to ring emergency services, they have to ring the relay service first, to book in the police, to get them. So that's all minutes, vital minutes, when you're in a situation of a crisis of family violence. So there's a huge amount of barriers for people, and often people with a disability, it will be carers or an intimate partner, that are their main carer, so they're reliant on them for transport, for communication, to go shopping for them. So how are they going to get to, your first point of entry, which is the orange door here in Gippsland? I think that there's so many barriers for people, and, barriers of, I'm here with my intimate partner, I've got a disability, who's going to care for me? If I tell, what's going to happen? And where am I going to go? Who's going to look after me? There's a huge amount of fear for people that have disabilities. And then I look at the overlay. If you've got mental health, if you've got an ABI, how are we going to manage to retain the information and get to appointments? Because as you know, when you've got mental health, you've got anxiety, you've got depression, you might have, personality disorder, but there's a lot of overlays, and really sometimes you can't remember all the information. You can't retain it. So who's going to help you get to your appointments if you can't retain anything? There's just so many barriers. There's too many to mention.
I can speak about the migrant, refugee and multicultural communities, which is the cohort that I'm working with at the moment. There have unique challenges that they could experience in accessing services, which can include the language barriers, visa-related issues, the lack of services tailored specifically for the community in our region. We also found that the formal help-seeking behavior can be impacted by fear of authorities, like their negative experiences with police or other figures of authority back in their home country or throughout their journey in Australia. So a lot of those overlays can be significant factors for a person from a multicultural background to seek help. Also, I'd like to speak about the unique experiences of young people from the multicultural backgrounds, because they're at this position which is in the middle of two different cultures. On one hand, they're trying to fit in with their peers, with their classmates in their schools in Australia. And at the same time, there's expectations, customs, traditions that they have to follow back home. Usually they might be the first person in the family who learns how to speak English, which could be a reason why they could be used as, utilized as interpreters. Mm-hmm. So whenever a family violence situation happens, they might be used, and they could be re-traumatized by being with that practice. Also, it's been found that the rates of non-intimate partner violence or extended family violence from extended family members is higher on the multicultural communities, especially with the in-laws or with the young people or children experiencing family violence through as indirectly or indirectly. Yeah.
How do we, as support workers, as everyday community members, as friends who care about these individuals, support them in a way that doesn't cross boundaries and doesn't make them increase resistance to wanting to access services?
I talk about my program. So I do run active bystander for young people, for multicultural young people. So this is to recognize the signs of family violence and how to safely intervene to your peers or offer support. So that's one of the ways. It's primarily with the Strengthening Communities project, promoting healthy relationships, conflict resolution, teaching healthy communication skills for young people. So that's one of the things we could do, and I think it's a great way to say to start with young people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's also about believing people and being open to listening.
Yeah.
It's not about judging, and it's also not about telling people, as we said before, that person's an expert in their own situation. Everyone's situation is unique. So it might be that you provide them with some information about, do you know about this agency? Or just let you know that they're available if and when you wish to choose to go there. So I think we are changing our views about family violence. It's actually, we're doing lots more discussions with the media on how to report family violence. Still, sometimes I find myself at the television going, that's family violence, please name it. But we are better about naming what is actually happening. It's not necessarily that, I heard that noise next door and I'll just shut my door and pretend I didn't hear it. There's more active knowledge about what's happening with the community now.
Yeah. I know one of the things that I'm very grateful to see is we're getting more awareness around coercive control.
Yes.
I think there's still a lot more awareness to be had around coercive control. What is coercive control exactly? What does it? Because I think as well some people are confused about what exactly it is.
It's a pattern of behaviour that puts control over a person, that makes them fearful about what are the repercussions around what will happen if I do that. So coercive control happens right across the family. So if there's a family of mum and children, there will be coercive control that impacts on those children as well. Yeah. It's like, you shouldn't do that. If you do that, this might well happen. So children will talk about the fact that they'll hear Dad come home and they can tell by the way he enters the door about what's going to happen. They already know, they can sense that foreboding feeling around it. But it can be really subtle at times. So coercive control is really difficult for people to understand how that happens, and it's very psychological for people. So it can be, include financial control over your religion, whether you can go. It's that whole control about seeing family and friends. But coercive control underlies all family violence matters.
Yeah. Do you find, and I only touch on this for a brief second, it's one of the things that I've noticed in my roles that I do in mental health, that, how do I word this one? How do you find supporting a man when he's the victim? Because one of the things that I've observed, disproportionately it is women who are the victims. Absolutely not up for negotiation. But certainly one of the things that I'm starting to notice in my different roles is just subtly, gently, more and more men are starting to pop their hand up and go, actually, please help. And it can be really hard to support men just because there's not a lot of services around for men. And coercive control seems to be, this is my personal observation, it seems to be the more often than not the vehicle of that. And then occasionally you get some sprinkled in some physical violence. How do you, because I know I'm struggling with it, and I know talking to other organisations, like it is something that they're like, we're trying to figure out how to handle this one. How do you find it as someone who or you're at the front line, like you would see it more than I do working in counselling adjacent services.
Yeah, so Quantum actually isn't funded to work with men, but the Orange Door will deal with men, and Windermere will also support men who are victims of family violence. But I think for men, it's another added layer of shame around how their masculinity feels for them to be a victim of family violence and to actually even talk about it. So we know that the statistics say that 1 in 16 men are victims of family violence. So it does occur. 75% of family violence is by a male. So it might be a male towards another male. But it does happen, and generally it is more psychological abuse that will occur. But psychological abuse, and people have told me before that sometimes they'd prefer that hit and it's over and done with than that ongoing psychological abuse that eats away on your whole self-esteem or your whole well-being. So it can be so impactful on people and create this terrible outcome for them. So it is really important, and I think the education around medical professionals, so doctors, we do a lot of education with doctors when they're training around identifying family violence or asking the questions, you know, are you safe? Does someone at home make you feel unsafe? Not necessarily do they need to be the expert, but, you know, making a mental health plan, you know, seeing someone that's a psychologist that understands family violence is really important to get that therapeutic help.